Hey everyone, welcome back to Born to Climb. And in today's episode, we're diving deep into one of the most talked about topics in business today, DEI. And there's no one better to break it down than my guest, TaChelle Lawson. TaChelle is a powerhouse in business strategy and leadership, and she's known for her bold, no-nonsense approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she's the author of Black is Not a Credential. And she works with CEOs and companies to make DEI actually work for businesses and not work against it. In this conversation, we tackle the biggest misconceptions about DEI, why it's so polarizing, and what most companies are getting wrong. We also talk about leadership, culture, and the role of business in shaping society. Whether you're a leader, an entrepreneur, or just someone who's tired of all the noise around this topic, this episode is for you. So let's go ahead and dive in. Hey everybody, welcome back to Born to Climb, and I am with TaChelle Lawson. TaChelle, welcome to the show.
Hello, James. Thanks for having me.
TaChelle, I've been looking forward to this conversation because there's so many things that I want to ask you, and I'm going to start out with this because DEI, this is, you talk about this, you've written about this, you speak about this, but DEI has become a highly polarizing topic, especially in recent years. And so why do you think this is? And I guess a follow-up to that, what do you believe most people misunderstand about it?
So let's start with why it's such a problem or why it is so polarizing. And in order to do that, we have to rewind a few years. And so I'm going to start with 2020, when basically all of us remember DEI becoming the topic. We all sat in our living rooms, thanks to COVID, right? And we watched as George Floyd was killed by a police officer. And that stirred a lot of emotions across not just in the United States, but it stirred a lot of emotions around the world. And what was the most resounding message was Black people have been saying that they have been unfairly treated for decades, that we have been the targets of police brutality for decades, that we don't have access to equal housing, all of that. And suddenly it was undisputable that that was a real experience. Like, we all watched it. And so what happened, where emotions were at their absolute highest. So the Black community was angry and demanding justice. And then you have the white community that's saying, oh crap, they've been telling the truth. And that was a huge emotional reckoning for our country. And I think what happened was, instead of hitting the pause button, truly hitting the pause button long enough to have conversations about why this was happening and how we stop it from happening, there was an emotional response. And I call that the overcorrection. I talk about this in my book, Black is Not a Credential. There was an overcorrection. And so that went from, hey, we should address these inequities to, we're going to just try to make this good with money. Here's public commitments. We're going to do something to right this wrong. Social justice this, racial equity that, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, $100 million commitment here. In 6 months, the country pledged over $50 billion to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Billion with a B. Instead of actually stopping and saying, why is this still happening in 2020? Like, that's where we should have started. So because it was an emotional decision, there was bound to be another emotional decision that comes from that. And that's where we are today. The emotional decision that was essentially led by the previous administration was, we're going to make this right. And companies bought into that. The new administration is coming in and saying, no. And now companies are saying yes, no to that as well. The challenge, though, James, is that somewhere in the middle is where we should be. We do have a race problem in this country. There's no question about that. But it's not just a Black racial problem. It's not just a white racial problem. We have a problem with the fact that we don't first and foremost look at each other as countrymen or Americans or brothers and sisters. Why do you have to immediately say, oh, there's TaChelle the Black woman? I'm a million other things as well. Just like I'm sure you're a million other things besides a white man. And so that's where the conversation starts in terms of why it's so polarizing. Does that make sense?
100%, exactly. What do you think? What do you think people misunderstand about DEI?
I think they misunderstand what its intention was meant to be because it's been so poorly implemented. It's not meant to be this divisive, polarizing, one group elevates while another group suffers. That's not what it was meant to be. But I can 100% see why that's the interpretation or why people believe that. So what diversity, equity, and inclusion was meant to be was an examination of what is not working. We have to acknowledge that we did all see George Floyd get killed. We've heard the stories about the Breonna Taylors, the Ahmaud Arbery's. We know this. So we know that that's real. It was meant to be an examination of what's going on, what those processes are, what those procedures are that create any type of inequity for a person based on their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, and correct it. It was not meant to say, hey, you know what, TaChelle has had a hard life because she's black, and so James, now you just need to suffer and no more opportunities are available for you because we need to make sure that TaChelle hasn't. That's not what it was meant to be, but that's how it was executed. You know what I mean? There was anything that, if there's the word inclusion involved, but I am excluding you to include me, then it completely nullifies inclusion. It doesn't exist. And I think that's what's commonly misinterpreted or misunderstood, is that's not what it was intended to be. But because of its implementation and the lack of pause to understand what exactly it was that we were fixing, this is where we are.
Well, this is obviously a big topic, especially right now at the time that you and I are recording this, and some companies are scrapping DEI programs. Other companies are digging deeper and saying, no, we are doing this, and there's all kinds of controversy. So before we get any further, can you just quickly explain what the three letters of DEI all represent? Because I think a lot of people, they get diversity. A lot of people are unclear on the E, on what that means. And so, yeah, can you just walk us through D, E, and I?
Absolutely. So the D is, I won't spend too much time on, it's the diversity. And I like to call diversity a fact. It's just the way that it is. I am black, you are white, I am a woman, you are a man. There's nothing that either one of us can do about this. You were born in Canada, I was born in the United States. These are all things that are beyond our control. So we're going to walk out of our front door into the world, and we're going to encounter people that are from completely different walks of life, experiences, etc. That's a fact. Equity is different, and this is the part of DEI that majority of people reject, and I understand it. Its intention is to level the playing field, keep everything nice and fair. The challenge is that in implementation, what is commonly attempted is to create an equity of outcomes. And that's not possible. I can't guarantee that you're going to bring the same level of commitment and energy and etc. to the team as I'm going to, or vice versa. We can't guarantee that. So why should we be able to guarantee that our outcomes are going to be the same? This is what's fundamentally being rejected. The I, inclusion, is 100% a choice. And this is why when I'm counseling and advising leaders on their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, I'm asking, what does that I mean in reality, in implementation? Because if you just put a cool little poster on your wall in the employee dining room or mention it in your core values, that doesn't mean that I feel included in real life. It's an action word. It is a choice. So I have the option of making you feel included, James, or making you feel excluded. And that is, at the end of the day, who has a problem with inclusion? There's nothing wrong with inclusion because it really boils down to respect. Now, when you start to put all those three together, the challenge becomes who's determining what's diversity? Who's determining whether or not equity is leveling the playing field or executing to some degree of equity of outcome? And who's determining who's included? Those are where the challenges start to come in. In theory, they sound great: diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's the implementation that falls short.
Yeah, which is going to come down to leadership. So, my world is we go into companies, we do a lot of leadership training, leadership consulting. And from a leadership perspective, diversity is important. When you're building a team, diversity of thought, diversity of even backgrounds on a team, that's going to give your team a greater perspective of, in a sense, a greater view to know how to go forward. So in that way, from a leadership perspective, absolutely. And even from an inclusion perspective, when we're working with, let's say, a group of frontline managers, the idea is, of course, to include everyone. The more people you can include in decisions, or at least to their opinions to weigh in, that's one of the foundational pieces of psychological safety, right? Yeah. The equity one is harder to figure out, like, okay, well, how does that fit into this puzzle? So what I want to know is when companies reach out to you and say, hey, TaChelle, we need some help with this DEI thing programs that we're trying to do. What is typically their biggest challenges that they're asking you to help them with?
Oh boy, let's put it this way. Normally when someone reaches out to me, there's an existing problem. So they're very rarely reaching out saying, hey, we want to develop this program. They're reaching out because something has gone fundamentally wrong with an existing program. So either they're predominantly white employees, and this is typically middle-level managers, are complaining about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they've been denied opportunities, they haven't had options for promotions. That's creating a problem. Or there's someone on the consumer side that is complaining about the messaging that's coming through. It's starting to feel too political. It's starting to feel too ideological. Like it starts to feel like it's creating a problem. And I frame everything around what I call the 3 R's: revenue, reputation, and retention. Revenue, reputation, retention. These are the 3 things that every other department, every other product, every other service is rated on. In any business, we determine whether or not this is good for business. In terms of profitability, we determine whether this is going to create a potential threat to the reputation, and whether or not this is going to cost us employees or customers. And that's how I frame solving the diversity, equity, and inclusion challenge. Did you implement programs or policies or procedures that is creating a potential threat to one of these 3 R's? If you have employees that are threatening to leave because they feel that being white means that they are not going to have a fair opportunity, you have created a threat to your retention. And this is very bad for a number of reasons, because then that also affects your reputation, which you end up in a lawsuit that affects your revenue. And so what I try to get my clients to understand is it doesn't have to be so obvious. And by that, when there's the DEI programs that are typically implemented, it's hey, let's make sure that we have these boxes to tick. Do we have a white person? Or if so, is that person gay or lesbian? Because if so, that's great. Box ticked. Do we have a black person? No, we need to hire someone. So sorry, James, you are qualified. You have the experience. You have the background. But, we need a box to tick. So we're going to hire TaChelle instead. That's ineffective. And you're 100% threatening at least one of those 3 R's. And so when you start to frame it that way, leaders tend to take a little bit, they take a little bit of the guilt off. I think if I could describe a lot of the situations I walk into, there's this guilt or pressure to do DEI a certain way, even when it's backfiring, even when you have employees that are pushing back, even when you have customers that are pushing back. There has been this guilt or this pressure of feeling like I still need to do this. Well, you actually can do it, but it has to be smart. It still has to align with the overall business. It's not a one-off.
TaChelle, you and I were talking just before we started recording, and you were mentioning about the challenge that a lot of business owners or even CEOs face today, sort of stuck between this rock and a hard place. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so there isn't a CEO in this country that isn't thinking or having a conversation about DEI. Like, not one. And we understand it. We turn on the news, there's Target's being boycotted. Right? You have pastors that are calling to boycott Target because Target has said that they're pulling back on their DEI. Then you have Costco or Elf Beauty that are saying we're doubling down on our DEI. Where does that leave every other CEO? Where you see Elf Beauty's customers that are saying, yes, thank you for doubling down. We support this. They're super excited. Okay, that's one customer. Then you have Costco, they're doubling down. They're getting pushback. They are getting pushback. There are certain customers and employees that are saying, yeah, this is fantastic. But then others are saying, leave it alone. Enough is enough. So if you're the CEO, how do you make this right? Which decision makes sense for your business? It's somewhere in the middle. Because I'll tell you this, making a statement that you're doubling down is not smart. It's just not. Making a statement that you're backing down is also not smart. These CEOs should be, first and foremost, hitting the pause button and going back into their companies and examining what DEI policies are currently in place that present threats. Because when I go in, I'm looking at, would I respond positively to this message? Would I care about this message? And I'll give you an example. A local coffee shop wants their employees to be able to express themselves. Okay, so I walk in and there's an employee with a badge on that says, I have a trans daughter. I don't care. I genuinely don't care. That doesn't make me a bigot. That doesn't make me a hateful person. I really just want to come in for a cup of coffee. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to come in for a cup of coffee. And so when I ask those questions of what value is that statement making to the customer? How is that going to potentially affect your 3 R's? And so those are the types of questions that I advise CEOs to examine before they make a promise or a commitment to double down or to back down. How does this benefit the company positively or negatively? Because I have looked, I have researched, I have watched tons of videos. I haven't heard one person say that they hate diversity, or they are opposed to diversity, or that they are opposed to inclusion. It is the implementation, and it is of the E. I need to be able to express myself. Okay, but I really don't need to know your religious beliefs or your sexual orientation or what happens inside of your home. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's what makes this country beautiful is that we can all have these different ideologies and different beliefs and so on and so forth. And that we can still come into a coffee shop and have a cup of coffee and that be the end of it. It doesn't have to turn into this big political conversation or agenda. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is trying to appease both sides is impossible. You will offend one group more than the other. And depending on what percentage that group represents of your customer base, it's very dangerous. But at the end of the day, I really don't want to know about anything other than, is that cup of coffee going to be hot? Is it going to be the same price? And is it going to be delivered with a pleasant experience? Positive smile, good energy, clean environment, the things that we actually care about. That's what I think matters.
When I think of companies, especially larger companies, right, there's almost 2 pieces to this. There's the HR side, and HR has challenges, we have a lot of HR, our clients. So HR has a lot of challenges just with everything they deal with and legal things. But when it comes to hiring, recruiting, obviously DEI is front and center for them in figuring that out. But then there's everyone else in the company who has nothing to do with, in a sense, who's hired. Some companies, the managers, they don't even get final say of who they get to hire. It's HR. So sometimes I almost see it like there's two pieces here. Yes, HR is going to be maybe more plugged into DEI, but what about just your regular mid-level manager? They're leading a team, trying to get something done. How do they practice, DEI?
So first, let me say, HR should not be in charge of DEI in any way, shape, or form. I think the majority of the problems that we're seeing and the wholehearted rejection of DEI is because of HR's incredibly poor implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because their capability is to tick a box. It is to just do that. And so the challenge with that is, to your point, is that employee is hired to tick a box. They may or may not be qualified for the position. They are then inserted into this department or this area where the hiring manager didn't necessarily have a final say in bringing that person on. And then they need to be integrated into that culture or that environment. And they're not very well received. And that is where DEI is the most important, and why I emphasize that it has to make sense for the overall business. When you're just doing it to tick the boxes and you're calling yourself inclusive, you did not create a positive and inclusive experience for an employee that does not have the qualifications or the skill set, and then dropping them into a department who is not going to be inclusive to them. There's a really, really good chance of that, and it has not necessarily to do with their skin color or their gender or any of that. It's because they don't fit. They are not qualified. They don't understand the business. There's a number of different reasons. And that starts with what exactly is our goal and our purpose with DEI. Because when it's done right, James, it doesn't feel like an obligation or a box you have to tick. It's integrated into the overall culture. So we understand that diverse perspectives help us solve better problems. Better problems means we have happier customers, because most of our customers are going to be diverse. I don't care if the person walking into my coffee shop is male or female, a grandmother or, a high school student. They're coming in for a cup of coffee. And it helps us to better serve our customers and understand their problems. When it's approached that way, when we want every customer and every employee to have a positive, respectful, and inclusive experience, and inclusive it's a really buzzy word, but essentially what we're talking about is we want to have a respectful culture. We want to have an environment where you and I can agree to disagree. We can have our, again, perspectives, experiences, and it doesn't take anything away from either one of us. When we have a culture or policies that we approach it that way, everyone's executing diversity, equity, and inclusion on a regular basis. It's ingrained in the culture. It doesn't feel like something that you have to pick up and, check the box. And that's what I reject. And that is why I adamantly advocate in my book that HR should have nothing to do, or let me rephrase, HR should not be in charge of DEI in any way, shape, or form.
I want to get to your book in just a moment, but before we jump into that, this comes back to, again, my point about leadership. Like, I think of, correct me if I'm wrong, and obviously we're all going to have our blind spots. When I think of DEI, I think of 75 to 80% of that, in a sense, if we want to call those, like, let's say needs, the needs that we're trying to meet in our company, in our society, 75 to 80% of those needs are met just by great leadership. Like, back to my point about when a manager looks at his team and realizes, hey, we need more diversity here, that's going to make us better. Because diversity of backgrounds creates diversity of thought, right? Diversity of thinking, diversity of ideas. And in the same way on inclusion, again, back to psychological safety. If my people feel psychologically safe in the workplace, they bring more of themselves here, right? And so what am I going to do that? Also, we'll teach managers, hey, be on the lookout for anything that compromises safety. If somebody's disrespectful, if somebody makes a remark about, whatever, could be about somebody's religion or they want to espouse their political beliefs. Well, yes, we're in a country of free speech, but that doesn't help the safety of our culture, right?
Sure.
So in this team, hey, that our guardrails are, we're not really going to talk about this topic or this topic here because that doesn't help us. So to me, great leadership does a lot of that. I'm not saying it does all of it, but would you agree with my thinking, or correct me if you think I'm off?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think one of the challenges, again, is inclusive or diversity and inclusion, DEI, inclusive culture. They're all buzzy. They're cute. They sound really good. But in theory, it's respect. And in professional environments, there are boundaries. So you can't come in and make derogatory, hateful, meaning or debasing comments and then say, oh, well, I'm just expressing myself, I'm just being authentic, or it's a free country. No, that's not how it works. And leadership has to set those guardrails. Leadership sets that policy, and leadership forms a culture of respect. And what, again, back to why I reject HR being in charge of this, is because there's, to me, a fundamental gap in their ability to shape that type of leadership. That starts at the top. When a CEO makes an announcement that this is the way that it's going to be, and then drops it down from, C-suite to VP, director, so on and so forth, that culture is respected. HR doesn't have that level of authority. They just don't. And so when we're saying diversity, equity, and inclusion and respect is demonstrative. It's very clear that you are either showing respect or you're showing disrespect. That part is not neutral. And so, yes, leadership has 100% responsibility of shaping what that culture looks like and setting up those guardrails and saying, no, you don't get to hide behind buzzwords. You don't get to hide behind trends and be disrespectful or create any type of disruption to the company, any type of disruption to the culture, any type of disruption to the environment. You don't get to do that. And I've seen this, James, since diversity, equity, and inclusion exploded in 2020. I've seen leadership take a very lukewarm approach to addressing employees of color. I've seen them take a very, very soft approach to calling out behavior that had no place in a company, and that has to stop. There is no, white leading or black leading or you're leading, and you're leading everyone, and that has to be consistent and it has to be strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask a question about belonging, because in your work, you emphasize that the only B in a company should be business, suggesting that this whole idea of belonging may be a bit misplaced in the corporate context. So can you expand on that?
I'll keep it PG, but I definitely have very strong opinions about, I think it's BS in the professional world, and for a number of reasons. Belonging is very deep. I belong to the Black community. I belong to the Lawson family. It's a very, very deep, that creates a sense of purpose, and it's connected to your core values. So in essence, belonging is only valuable through exclusion. And I'm going to expand on that. I can't belong to this group if everyone can belong. There's no value in it. So in order for me to feel like this is a place that means I'm excluding other people, which is why some of the most successful brands are incredible, because they unapologetically exclude brands that don't belong. Ferrari being one of my favorites. Ferrari makes no bones about not communicating or talking to Camry owners. They don't care. Their customers are those that buy Ferraris and everything about them. So they are creating a sense of belonging through culture, and that is through exclusion. When you start to create this environment of cute little buzzwords like everyone belongs and be your authentic self, it starts to muddy the waters, and it makes it very unclear about what is and isn't appropriate. So when a leader comes in and tries to set guardrails, how do you set guardrails in a culture of belonging where everyone is just free to be themselves? I can easily push back on, well, wait, I'm just being TaChelle, and TaChelle doesn't like James because he has blue eyes, and the last person I met with blue eyes was awful and mean. It doesn't make any sense. Culture of respect is the only thing that actually makes sense in a business. Belonging is cute, but guess what? As soon as it starts to disrupt the 3 R's, it's one of the first to go. And that's what I mean. I'm pretty sure HR came up with belonging because it sounded good, but in theory, it makes no sense.
Where do you think it started, this idea of I need to be able to come to work and everybody has to like me for all the aspects of my life? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
because it's this idea, again, back to even some of the examples you've used, we all come from different backgrounds and ideologies, religious beliefs, and all these things are, it's like they could be, what you believe could be triggering to someone else on the team. And so then you're faced with the choice. The choice is either, well, I should be able to say what I believe and them not be triggered, or for the good of the team, I just won't talk about that because it has nothing to do with work. So I just think back to when I was young, like these were never conversations, but now there's more complexity in the workplace, in teams, because it's like this expectation of I need to be able to come to work and just be my authentic self, right? We hear that. And I've talked about that as well. We want people to feel free to be themselves, but where's the line on that? And this is just a sincere question. Where's the line on that? People being able to come, feel like they're in a safe work environment, that in a sense they don't have to hide parts of themselves. At the same time, they don't feel like they have to push parts of themselves into the spotlight.
I am not a fan of the authentic self. Again, because I think, and I have a whole section on buzzwords in the book. I'm not a fan of it because what we're really talking about is your authentic professional self. There are versions of ourselves that are appropriate for children. There are versions of ourselves that are not appropriate for children. And I use it as this. When I have my 8-year-old niece, the conversations she and I are having are very, very different than the conversations I'm having with my girlfriends over Sunday brunch and a pitcher of mimosas. No one needs to tell me that that's inappropriate, what isn't appropriate to say to my 8-year-old niece. And that's how I view this. Both versions of TaChelle are authentic. Both versions. So when I'm with my niece and we're, laughing and joking about unicorns and mermaids, which are not real, but in that context, I am fully engaged and enjoying every single moment, just as much as I am when I'm with my girlfriends. And then I transition on Monday morning and I'm in a boardroom and I know what conversations are appropriate and not appropriate. All 3 versions are authentic. And so, yes, in the boardroom, I may not drop as many F-bombs as I do when I'm talking with my girlfriends over dating and cocktails, but I'm still direct and strong and to the point. I'm still very much authentic TaChelle when I'm having conversations in the boardroom. And so my point is this, James, we all know what is and isn't appropriate for work. And that's what I mean. That buzzword gives us permission to step outside of those lines. And once I step outside of those lines, I'm inviting everyone else to step outside of those lines. So imagine having a company of 10,000 employees and everyone's being their authentic selves. It could be complete chaos. Instead of, yes, you can still laugh. When I say be your authentic self, I mean you don't have to like cover your laugh loudly. Okay, but don't laugh and say, I can't effing believe, like that's not appropriate. And you know it. I think that's part of the challenge is that we've gotten to a point where feelings matter more than facts. Feelings matter more than professionalism. Then I've had the question, well, who defines professionalism? Okay, again, you know what isn't appropriate. Let's put it this way. If a 7-year-old were sitting in the lunchroom with you, would you be making those same comments and statements? If the answer is no, it's not professional. A child should be able to walk into this environment and not be... And that's what I mean. We know what isn't appropriate.
I like how you break that down, the idea of my authentic self versus my authentic business self. For sure, those are different. You know, you've mentioned cutting through the noise of woke agendas to bring clarity to DEI. And so I'm curious, how do you define woke agendas and what challenges do they present to the diversity efforts?
So a woke agenda is, to me, very simple. It lacks facts. It is completely based on emotion. It's based on this utopian idea that everyone deserves to have a place and a space to talk about their personal feelings, their ideas, and project that onto the masses. If it creates a threat to one of the 3 R's, it is woke. It's very simple because diversity is backed by data. I can come in and tell you, I can show you the numbers. We've all seen the case studies of diversity increasing performance, of inclusive cultures and increasing innovation. Those are backed by data, so we know that works. Me coming in and telling you that it's just time to start making everyone use pronouns is not. That's probably one of my favorites right now is still the pronouns. I'm not inclusive if I don't use my pronouns, but it's an inclusive culture which allows me to be authentic, and it doesn't make any sense. And so those are woke ideologies. Those are woke narratives. The question comes down to, how does this initiative affect the business? If you cannot attach it to a data point, to a number, to a solid ROI, it doesn't belong in the business.
Yeah, I like how you bring it back to those 3 R's that you talk about, because it creates sort of a guiding light for people. It's just a complex topic. I think most leaders, at least that I know, they want profitable companies, but they want happy employees, right? They want both of those things. I want to just ask about your book, which recently came out. When did your book come out?
January 14th.
January 14th. It is recent. The title is Black is Not a Credential, the Corporate Scam of DEI. So first of all, like, just tell us a little bit of the background. The title's very provocative, obviously. And tell us a little bit about the book. What's the main thrust of it? And also, I'd love to hear some of the reaction you're getting.
Yeah, so it is definitely a provocative title. I get 3 reactions to it. I get the chuckle, right? Like the, okay, in agreement. Yeah, it's not a credential. I get the pearl clutch. I can't believe. And then the side eye. Like, does she know that she's black? And then the third is just pure curiosity, intrigue. What is this book about? So Black is Not a Credential is everything that I've just shared. It is based on making diversity, equity, and inclusion work for the business. It should not be a social project or social identity, because I am of the belief that social justice, any type of social equity programs or initiatives, they are at the exact opposite of a business's purpose. which is to solve problems and make money. At any point that social initiative starts to create problems and cost me money, the initiative is gone. So just stay away from it altogether. Support things that align with the business. Support programs that align with the business. But more importantly, make the 3 R's the center of every decision. We already know that this is how leaders operate their corporations. Diversity, equity, and inclusion should be no different. But I go through and I explain how we got to the point where skin color and gender became a credential, starting in 2020 with the social justice movement, the uprising. But then I also take us through this journey of how diversity, equity, and inclusion became the biggest scam in corporate America, from completely unqualified professionals going in and leading trainings in corporations, collecting $50,000, $60,000, $75,000 checks to walk into rooms and tell employees that their problem is that they're white and that they are racist, with absolutely no baseline of understanding the business, with no real leadership experience whatsoever, just running trainings based on some of their lived experiences, and in many cases borrowed lived experiences, and then walking out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in training. And those checks were just written by corporations who were trying to prove that they were woke, right? Because that was the trendy word at the time, that they were woke, or they were down, or more importantly, that they just weren't racist. And that became a huge, huge scam for people that, hey, it's my turn to win. On to my personal favorite, which is higher education, which is collecting upwards of $6 billion in diversity, equity, and inclusion certificates. So I can go and I've done this. I have been certified by Cornell University, thought it was incredibly valuable until I had a conversation with someone with zero business acumen, who told me she had the same certification. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. And I went back through and realized, oh gosh, this is terrifying. This is absolutely terrifying. So diversity, equity, and inclusion didn't just take off in corporate world. Higher education has been cashing in on this narrative, which is why they're in no way, shape, or form wanting DEI to be devalued because of how much money it's making in certificate programs for the Cornells, Northwestern, like UCLA. These universities all have major programs to create diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants that are then turning out into the world and going and trying to talk to ABC company and convince them, hey, I have this certification from Cornell University. Oh, you're hired. But there's no business acumen behind that. They're not looking at your 3 R's. They're not looking at the potential liabilities that they're creating by walking in and doing this training on, hey, white people, you all just need to accept the fact that you were born racist and that's it. So I talk about all of that, and then more importantly, I get down to the brass tacks, what CEOs and leaders need to hear. And that is enough is enough. It's time to, put the games away and start leading your company, knowing full well that if you shut down any of these programs that are ineffective, it doesn't make you a racist. If someone calls you a racist, make them prove it, because you have a business to run. You have a leadership role to fulfill. And in order to do that, you have to shut down things that are damaging or potentially threatening to the 3 R's.
TaChelle, it brings up a larger question. You made the point that, hey, businesses exist to solve a problem and make money. But some people would also say, yeah, but don't businesses have a role to play also in the social, in a sense, justice of our world? If we're just only capitalism and let's just make money, isn't that bad? And shouldn't companies feel an ownership to contribute to the shaping of society? Well, what do you say to the person who thinks like that?
I say to an extent. I really do. At the end of the day, we patronize businesses because they're helping us solve a problem. I don't think it's their responsibility to necessarily shape society per se, but I do think that the social consciousness of a business is important. And what I mean by that is not strip or take away from society or from the communities that you serve. But to assume that I am going to be both a socialist and a capitalist, that's where it gets really dangerous. And I think this is where a lot of people are very upset and very confused, because you had corporations that came out and made these very large social commitments, and as soon as it threatened their profitability, they pull back because that is their priority. Now, I am a fan of aligning with programs, projects, nonprofits that make sense and align with your business. It's when it strays too far out that I have a problem, because I know it has no longevity and it backfires and it negatively affects the 3 R's. So I think I might be in that majority, or potentially just in the majority with CEOs of. I don't necessarily think that it is the corporation's responsibility to shape society. I think it is the responsibility not to deter or to take away from it.
Well, it is a fascinating discussion. It's definitely a sensitive discussion, and it's a needed discussion to have about these issues. So I would love to talk with you longer, but I know I've taken up our time here. So for people who would like to get a hold of you, HR professionals, CEOs, outside of TaChelleLawson.com, is there another place that I should direct them to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can also direct them to figfirm.com. That's my consulting firm, Fig Strategy and Consulting. Or of course, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty engaged and active on LinkedIn as well.
We will have all of your information in the show notes in case you're listening to this while you're driving somewhere. So just go to jamesrobbins.com/podcast and look up the episode of TaChelle Lawson. TaChelle, just you have such wisdom to offer people, especially at a time that's confusing. You know, as companies do wrestle with, hey, I want to build a profitable company, but hey, I also want people to feel great about where they're working, and you know, how do I navigate this road? Especially, it's a very charged road emotionally right now. So your advice, I know, can help so many people. So if you're in one of those situations, reach out to TaChelle and get her to help you out. I think that would be great. The last thing I want to say, TaChelle, is what I appreciate about you is that it takes thick skin to dive into some of these topics that need to be talked about. I'm sure in many ways that your stance is not popular with a bunch of people, but it's your stance and you stand by it, and I just respect that. So again, I appreciate anyone who's out there using their voice to try to make things better as they see it, and I really respect you for that. Thank you for the time. It's really been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the encouragement and the support. Yes, it's not a popular position right now, but I think that most disruptors weren't popular when they took their position, but ultimately there's the wisdom, and more importantly, I think if we had these conversations 5 years ago, James, we would be in a very different position today. I really do. If we just had these honest, transparent conversations and asked questions, we wouldn't be where we are right now, trying to figure out how we still solve this problem. It's wild.
You are probably right about that. Well, listen, it's been an honor to have you here. I wish you all the best in the future here going forward, especially with the new book. Good luck with that. And TaChelle, thanks for being here.
Thanks, James.